Hello folks, this week sees the launch of the next War Within patch 11.07, which brings us a new zone, Siren's Isle. But along with that new zone is a surprising amount of additional content, so do hang around as I will be going through the extra stuff later in the video. One thing that is worth calling out is that this is a minor content patch. The main Mythic Plus, Raid and PvP Season 1 is set to continue until the next major patch 11.10 drops, which we're expecting to be in late February. I know that probably feels like a long time, but it's fairly typical for a World of Warcraft season. That does mean though that this patch needs to do some heavy lifting in terms of freshening up the season and trying to give it a bit more legs. The centerpiece of the new patch is a brand new zone, Siren Isle. This zone is based on an unused map from Battle for Azeroth, most likely intended for island expeditions, albeit it has clearly had a fairly substantial rework. So don't worry, there's no Azerite farming in sight. I have heard a few creators describe the patch as a Forbidden Reach 2.0, and I can certainly see where they're coming from, as there are elements which do remind me a bit of the Reach, but those similarities are quite superficial. This is in fact a very different beast. The zone itself is quite a bit smaller than the Forbidden Reach, being in fact marginally smaller than Mechagon was. Like Mechagon, it is a fairly dense zone in terms of the volume of enemies, and also in the way that it has a bunch of different gameplay systems, albeit I don't think there's quite as much depth as there was in Mechagon. We arrive in the zone as part of a goblin expedition to find that we're slightly beaten to it by a group of thankfully friendly Arathi, and the goblin involvement along with the BfA era visual design of the island very much helps to remind us of Mechagon. It's in the gameplay that the differences between the Forbidden Reach and Siren's Isle are most apparent. Whereas rare farming was core to the Forbidden Reach's gameplay loop, this new zone is focused around mainly weekly or bi-weekly quests with a few dailies. As someone who's never been a fan of rare farming, this makes this island a lot more to my taste, and for people who still feel the rare fatigue from early Dragonflight, I think they will appreciate this change quite a bit. While the questing isn't super exciting, there is a lot to explore for a small island, including a substantial underground Titan vault and 3 special event caverns with rares that you need to unlock by contributing resources in the main hub. The island also has a second storm phase, very similar to Mechagon's Other Place or the Rift phase in Korthia. This is unlocked by completing the main bi-weekly quest in the island, which unlocks a special assignment world quest which allows you to access the storm. The storm phase is an elite heavy area where enemies have a lot more health, but nothing super scary. Think something similar to the Jejardin area in the Circlet caverns. You'll no doubt want to knock this out, but I suspect you won't be spending a ton of time in there in the long term. It does though manage to do its job of expanding the space you have to explore by quite a bit. The small size of the zone is very noticeable in my view, probably more so than it was in Mechagon, and I think this is probably why Blizzard have chosen to make it a no-fly zone at launch. Thankfully that's not permanent, and you will be able to eventually unlock flying. This is, however, time-gated and will take you 6 weeks. Given the small size of the area, I can certainly see the argument in favour of making it a no-fly zone, but I don't think it's a very strong argument. Mechagon felt perfectly fine with flying, and even on the ground, I was very aware all of the time that this is quite a small area. And along with that, the amount of underground points of interest does give us lots of reasons to take to the ground even if we could have flown. That said, I'm not super salty about it being no fly on day one, but I do think that 6 weeks is far too long of a time gate for a minor patch zone that we will likely be moving on from after about 8 to 9 weeks. And I do think that we will be moving on this time. While the gameplay loop is pretty decent, and those of us who enjoy open world content will find plenty to enjoy for a few weeks, I do not feel it has the staying power of the Forbidden Reach. There's no equivalent to the Reach's Envoy system, which gave bonuses for the main Dragonflight renown, for example. On the reward front, the centerpiece is probably the most Forbidden Reach-like system. Circe's Circlet is a new ring, which, similar to the Onyx Amulet from the Forbidden Reach, has 3 special sockets, which we can fill with special gems which will be dropping from the content all over the Isle. This ring is, however, a much simplified version with a smaller set of effects to choose from. The ring starts from item level 619 but can be upgraded once a week all the way to 639, which will take about 6 weeks. Following a round of hotfixes in the last week, the effects from the ring's gems seem, at least from my initial impressions, to be roughly on par with a normal ring of the same item level, which in my view doesn't really feel super exciting. Don't get me wrong, for world content players or folks who are limited to hero track gear at maybe 619 or 626, once the ring's item levels are upgraded a bit, this will probably feel pretty decent. But for people who have access to mist track gear via Mythic Plus or Raid, unless the ring is further buffed, I don't think it's going to feel very interesting until it is fully ranked up. And this is probably the biggest issue that the ring has. The process to level the ring up is entirely time-gated, which means there's really no feeling of player agency to it, and potentially having to wait a few weeks for it to grow in power enough to feel worth using, I am not convinced that it's going to offer a very good first impression. And for those who play at the highest levels of the game, having the ring only become useful in maybe week 5 or 6, probably just 3 weeks before the season ends, will kinda honestly make it feel a bit pointless. My personal prediction is that we'll likely see another round of buffs in the first couple of weeks of the new patch. The only other power-based reward is item level 584 Veteran Track Catchup Gear, although in my personal view, Starter Gear might be a more accurate description given that we're in the final third of the new season. This is available from a vendor using the new island currency, Flame Blessed Iron, which drops from, well, everything in the Isle. Cosmetic-wise, things are a lot more interesting, with Thrioneer Eye of the Storm, a mount added back in Warlords of Draenor, finally becoming available, along with a Snapdragon mount with customizable colorings and a power surfboard mount. True to their quirky nature, the goblins also offer some rather interesting holiday-themed transmog, and there's also some more traditional-style Arathi-themed mogs too. And well, that's basically the Siren's Isle in a nutshell, but that's not all we are getting. With the launch of the new patch comes what is likely to be part 1 of the War Within's expansion-wide meta achievement, You Shall Not Pass. This awards a recolor of the Shadowlands Mythic Plus mounts, the Shadow of Doubt, and requires a bunch of activities from both patches 11.02 and 11.07. The Siren's Isle section of the achievement, I'll Remember You, also awards another mount, this time a recolor of the Dreadweight ship mount, the Breaker's Song. I have a video guide to the meta achievement, which I will link down below. We're also getting a bit of a blast from the past, with a Farewell to Arms, a brand new expansion-wide meta achievement for Battle for Azeroth, which awards 2 new mounts, Janny's Trash Pile for the whole meta achievement, and a B mount, the Honeyback Hive Mother from the BfA 8.0, 8.1 sections. This does require the old Najachar and Mechagon meta achievements too, which were kinda known for the huge amount of effort that they required to get done. Thankfully, the developers have done a pass over things and have reduced a fair few of the requirements. I also have a video guide that I will link down below, but this is for sure nevertheless going to offer a ton of open world content to do, especially if you skipped out in Battle for Azeroth. We're also getting a revamp for the Winterveil holiday. Now this is a bit of a mystery as Blizzard have shared nothing beyond this entry in the roadmap. That new content label does strongly suggest to me something that will be closer to the scale of the 2024 Love is in the Air revamp. So we'll have to see what we can get. While the 20th anniversary event will be drawn to a close at the start of January, the glut of time walking is not coming to an end, with the return of the Turbulent Timeways event. This was an event we also saw in Dragonflight, where doing time walking dungeons earns an XP buff that stacks up. Last time around, it was up to 5 times. And the achievement to max out your stacks for 5 weeks in a row is also going to be returning, along with a new mount, the Timeway Buzzbait mount. And finally, in January the 14th, we'll be seeing the return of Plunderstorm, the Battle Royale event. This time around, it's seeing a few changes, with a new currency and a store replacing the Renown track along with a brand new practice mode. These changes, I think, will be most appreciated by those players who weren't huge fans of the Battle Royale format, but who really wanted to farm the rewards nevertheless, as now they will at least be able to target the particular rewards that they want. Anyways, that's all of the new content for the patch. Overall, I feel that if you are an open world content fan, you're probably going to find quite a fair bit of new content to explore, and that will keep you occupied right through to the end of the season. But for fans of Raiding and Mythic Plus who don't usually engage much with the open world, then I'm afraid your wait for a bit of a freshen up is going to continue, unless that is you are a Plunderstorm fan, in which case you do have something to look forward to in the new year. I do though have a couple of other concerns about the patch. Firstly, with time walking being up every week doing 11.05, and now set to continue that way through much of 11.07, I can't help but wonder if you can have too much of a good thing. I personally am already feeling a little bit of time walking fatigue. My other concern is around the time gating of the access to flying, as well as 6 weeks in my opinion being far too long to wait for access flying in a minor patch. The next 11.10 patch is also going to see some flying restrictions, this time permanent ones due to the introduction of the dynamic ground travel system called Drive. And while that latter system is likely to offer a much better reason to limit flying, having 2 patches in a row with such restrictions, I do worry will end up feeling a bit too much for an era where the WoW team have at least been given us the appearance of finally embracing flying as a core part of World of Warcraft's player mobility. Some months ago, in a developer interview that discussed the Circlet caverns, the developers suggested that they felt that having 2 rare focus patches in a row might have led to player fatigue, which could have explained the somewhat negative vibe around the caverns rares. And while I do think that the developers have commendably taken that on board when it comes to the use of rares, I cannot help but think that they are repeating that same mistake with both time walking across 11.05 and 11.07 and flying across 11.07 and 11.10. For the latter, a lot is going to depend on how good the drive system turns out to be and how well they execute the transition between the flying areas and the grounded areas. But I do think that having this patch launched directly after the excessively time-gated restrictions of 11.05 is going to significantly raise the bar that new content is going to have to reach, which at best is adding a lot of avoidable downside risks to the 11.10 open world content. That's not to say that I'm completely pessimistic about the 11.10 content. If the developers do manage to make Drive feel great, then I'm sure it's going to add a lot to the game, but they sure have set themselves up to have a much rougher landing if it turns out to be a miss. Anyways, that's all of the new stuff that we can expect to keep us occupied until 11.10. I'm mainly excited by having some new stuff to explore and get my teeth into. But what is it about the new content that you're most interested in? Let me know in the comments down below. Whatever happens, I'm going to be here to cover both the response to the patch's launch and also the run up to 11.10 as it unfolds on the PTR. So if you're not already a subscriber, do make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you'll get notified whenever those new updates go live. And if you found this video useful or interesting, then hit that like icon to let both me and the YouTube algorithm know. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.